Good morning and welcome to another Bird News and Views. I'm your host, Don Burgess, who's happy to have a bit of sunshine today after the 3 or 4 days of rain we've had. And with us this morning is leader of the Free Democratic Movement, Marc Bean. Welcome, sir.
Good morning, greetings.
Now, if, for people down at the East End, there's a bit of sadness, I guess, with the loss of a stalwart.
Yeah, absolutely. I woke up this morning and for, I guess, my opening statement, I'd like to extend on behalf of my family and the Free Democratic Movement my heartfelt condolences to the family of a well-known stalwart individual from the West End community, the Somerset community, who passed away earlier this morning or late last night. I don't think it's appropriate for me to go further than to name that person, that individual, because I'm not sure if the rest of the family are aware or even willing for it to be public yet. In other words, out of respect, I'm not going to name names, but when this individual is known, people will understand that I would like to offer my condolences on behalf of my family and the Free Democratic Movement, and of course the entire West End community. We have lost another great individual, another leader, another stalwart. And 2020 has proven to be a tumultuous period in which many of the people of this country will remember for all the wrong reasons. And I think many people around the world are going to remember this year for all the wrong reasons. And so this is just another addition to it. Pain has become our handmaiden, and it's something that is going to require us as a people to rally around and be a strength to one another as we navigate this time period. So, my condolences.
My condolences on behalf of Bird News as well to the family. We had the throne speech earlier this month. We wanted Bird News wanted to give FDM a chance to share some reflections and thoughts on it. Just as a general opening thing, what did you think about it this year?
From my experience, I would say that this throne speech was a disappointment. If the reason or purpose of a throne speech is to set out your annual plan by which you can communicate to the electorate what your legislative agenda will be for the upcoming year, which is supposed to tie into an overarching vision, then I think that this throne speech has fallen short. It kind of reminded me of something that happened last year, because I'm not sure if we had a proper throne speech last year either. And so that is a little disappointing, but it also reveals the fact that the people of Bermuda are willing to accept mediocrity. And so the leadership of the country feel that they can get away with lower standards. And so that's something that the people of this country need to be aware of. You need to expect and ask for higher standards, especially when it comes to those who you vote for or those who lead us at a government level. If not, you cannot get up and complain when the premier or the government makes a decision or takes a step that you are not in agreement with, as if they have done something by sleight of hand or through deception, when really you just wasn't paying attention, or you're generally apathetic to the political environment and the legislative process. So that being said, I think that this, bearing in mind we are in a so-called post-COVID or COVID environment, I think that this throne speech fell short in terms of its intent to communicate a vision or actual tactical plans for the next year to the populace.
Yeah. How would you describe it then if it didn't share a vision?
Well, if it doesn't share a vision, because you can have an abbreviated throne speech, and this throne speech was 11 pages. That's remarkably short. But you can have a short throne speech if it's quality, if it sets out a clear idea or presents an idea or communicates an idea to the voting public to develop the confidence or at least the understanding as to the direction of the country, or where the country, the intent of the country is to go. And so what happened was is that if it doesn't present that concise idea or vision, then it could be reduced to a haphazard, piecemeal, cut and paste document meant to appease those who are not paying much attention to the political or legislative process in the first place.
Right.
And so I think the latter is what actually has occurred. There are bits and pieces in there which we certainly can subscribe to, I personally and the Free Democratic Movement. But generally speaking, overall, I wasn't as pleased. I would have loved to have seen a little bit more, especially when it comes to addressing the real issues of the country, and that is that we are existing in a post-COVID environment. Politicians have a large amount of unaccountable power today, and it's being driven by ideas from outside of Bermuda. That means that the separation between the actual voting populace and the decision makers has never been as wide as it is today, because many of us don't really know who the decision makers are, because the whole world is under this COVID instruction. And we are getting information from the World Health Organization and other international organizations. And so as a result, it is a challenge, because I would have thought that the third speech would have attempted to bridge that gap and connect the people closer to the decision-making process within a macro perspective, because at a macro level, most of our lives are being affected like never before in the history of modern times.
Right. I think one of the things maybe the POP would point to, what is the proposal to create a Bermuda National Digital Bank, whereas buy shares. Your thoughts on that?
When I first heard of it, I shook my head, because again, this what it reveals is the government's underlying philosophy of government, and that is government intervention. And so when the private sector is not able to provide the goods or services that the political leadership would like the public to receive, sometimes politicians feel that they have the ability to fill the gap and create institutions that are state-run, state-earned, or basically you intervene into the marketplace. And while that always is a path of good intentions, it's a road that is paved with good intentions. We know what happens with those roads of good intentions. And I think that this is the same case. I do understand the need for the government to try and create an institutional framework and institutions that can help facilitate the development of financial technology in the country. And we have seen a reluctance by the commercial banks, in particular in Bermuda, to provide banking services to fintech startups, etc. And that's created a difficult position for the government and the premier, who has pinned his hat in a large way to the development of fintech. And so I see him feeling that he is forced or taken a reactionary step to say, well, okay, commercial banks, historically in Bermuda, we know so many issues are surrounding just your very existence and the relationship that commercial banks have had with the country. And now we are seeing that you're finding reasons not to assist in the development of a diversification strategy in terms of fintech. What we're going to do, we're going to use the power of government to create a bank whereby the people of this country can then become shareholders in, and they too can then participate and benefit from the financial technology sector as shareholders and as earners. Oh, that sounds wonderful. It sounds great. And I know exactly where the premier is coming from. I understand the way he thinks. That's a Keynesian economic philosophy that he is utilizing. And to be honest, the majority of governments today around the world follow the same economic policies and strategies. So it's nothing new in that sense. But you will find that if you look around the world today, even before COVID, even with higher GDP globally, the majority of the people of the world, the average person, their income levels has decreased. Their standards of living have decreased. And that's because of policies that have been instituted around the world, inclusive of Bermuda, by politicians who have a good heart, who are desirous to do good by their people. But sometimes, even though you have that intent to do good by your people, it's a road to hell that's paved with good intentions. And so it can lead ultimately to a negative impact in terms of the general economic conditions of the country. I just can't see it work. Now, personally, if I ask would I invest in a national digital bank, I would say no. I would say no. And let me explain the reason why. Um, you see, today we have moved to an age of central bank digital currencies. That's the new buzzword in the financial sector around the world. Central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. And CBDCs, in a large measure, are going to replace commercial banks, the traditional commercial banking services and applications that we have been used to over decades and decades. And so central bank digital currencies are now going to disrupt the commercial banking environment, where I can see in the future that commercial banks are going to have to adjust and shift and focus more on fee-based income generation via investment and wealth management, the wealth management sector. In other words, deposit taking is going to be replaced by the central bank entities themselves. And so as a result, the value proposition of a national digital bank has to be questioned when you look at it in the broader context of central bank digital currencies, which is being driven by the central banks worldwide, of course, led by the Bank of International Settlements.
Okay. I think that part of the goal too is to be able to give mortgages to people at lower rates, so that more Bermudians can afford to buy homes. Again, I mean that's a good thing.
Good intentions, all good intentions. All right. I don't think there's anyone in the Progressive Labor Party government or the One Bermuda Alliance opposition that do not have a desire to help the people who voted for them. That's not the challenge.
Right.
Okay. And so when we're speaking about this idea of intervening into the market as a government to do something that the market doesn't have the appetite itself to do, is a perilous position to put ourselves in. And it indicates a wrong attitude and altitude towards economic development. We have already seen malinvestment through successive governments over the years. We have seen Morgan's Point. We have seen other developments that required large government guarantees and interventions to ensure that the project even got off the ground. Here's a fact that we have to accept. When it comes to development and attracting investment, if you are a government and you have to depend on guarantees and you have to intervene into the marketplace when the market itself is refusing to take that risk, it means that your policies in the first place are not conducive to attract direct private sector investment. So what you do, because your policies in the first place are not attractive, you try to catch up, or compensate by intervening in the market and providing taxpayer funds to reduce the risk in the private sector, where otherwise the private sector, if the project itself was viable and it met the smell test, the project itself, these private sector developers would actually assume the risk because they know that the reward is worth the attempt. But we don't see that. We don't see that in the PLP. We haven't seen that in the OBA. We haven't seen that over successive governments. And that speaks to the problem where our overall arching policy in terms of economic development is off kilter. We are a little bit rudderless. if you set policies in place that are pro-growth, meaning lower taxation, lower government spending, and lower regulations, then naturally that would unleash the creativity of the private sector to take the risk to do the things that the government feels that the people need.
Okay.
Let the people take the risk and not the government.
There was a couple other things in the throne speech that you may feel falls into this area of government intervention, but they spoke of investing in a shoreside facility for fishermen. How do you feel about that?
Well, I'll tell you what, it's an idea that I first presented as the minister when I was the minister of the environment. Okay, and so and people will know that I'm the youngest son of the oldest fishing family in Bermuda. So fishing is very close to me personally. And when I was the minister, certainly I took the steps and even spoke about it in the throne speech at the time, and even in the replies, the need for us to have a shoreside facility that can facilitate the development of our offshore fishery. That offshore fishery really isn't to provide fish for the local market. The intention of the offshore fishery is to target international markets. And so the shoreside facility or processing plant will permit for fish to be caught within our exclusive economic zone and processed properly so it can get to the market, whether that is London at Billingsgate or whether it's in Tokyo at the freshest and most premium state, so we can fetch the highest price. Now, people might say this doesn't seem to be too viable, but when you look at the quota for tuna, just tuna, within our EEZ, the quota that Bermuda is allotted on an annual basis, I believe, and in my mind, it's about 200 million. The value of it is about 200 million per annum in terms of the tuna quota that's allotted to Bermuda to harvest that can obviously be utilized towards our economic development in so many ways. Okay, so I am in favor of that. It would be hypocritical for myself as Marc Bean, once I just admitted that the idea came, right, to say, oh, I'm against it, even though that is government intervention in the economy. They are taking the steps to facilitate an industry. Okay, and I can excuse it by saying, well, government does a lot of facilitation of a lot of industries. What has to happen is once that shoreside facility is developed, then it needs to be closely aligned with the interests of the fishermen.
Right.
Because the fishermen are the ones that are going to be dependent and reliant on utilizing that to ensure that it can create another angle of economic development and growth for the country.
Right. They also mentioned like vertical farming as well to help. So there's a couple of points there.
These days, vertical farming is also a good idea. Aquaculture is a good idea. The fact of the matter is that Bermuda only produces 10% of what it consumes. So even when you add fishing and farming, which I think is something that from a self-sustaining perspective, naturally is something that we should encourage. But we have to also recognize in order to meet our daily needs, we're not going to be able to be self-sufficient in terms of all our foodstuffs.
Right.
Even the United States is not self-sufficient on its foodstuffs, right? So what's going to be required in addition to that is the facilitation of more trading links with alternative trading areas, for instance, Latin America, the African continent, etc., where the same produce that we depend on a day-to-day basis, we can have another supply route which should be able to lower the cost of food and produce in the country. Right. So it has to be a dual approach, trade and production.
Yeah. We saw how important it was during the COVID crisis for, people worried about the food supply, especially at this point. And you were talking about earlier with the bank about creating some equality.
Forgive me,
Okay.
forgive me, forgive me, forgive me. I don't know what happened, Justin. It just
It happens in 2020.
yes, yes. It says my fan is overheating. I'm not sure why. I've never seen this before.
Okay. Well, we'll soldier through. Sometimes.
Yes. Okay. My apologies. My apologies to the people of the country.
I think everybody can be forgiving. We've all probably had that happen to us at one point or another.
Everybody's saying come out again. No, unfortunately, my phone is talking about it's overheating, man. I don't know why.
Okay, why don't we try? Okay, I guess we lost Mark again. We'll try to have him back at some other point where the phone's not overheating. But we appreciate those of you who stayed with us, and we didn't get to any of the comments or questions today, but we'll have Mark back at another point to talk about some other issues, including the living/minimum wage that's being proposed. On behalf of Burn News, as always, we wish you a very beautiful day.